the stream I had the stream audio on, and then I just heard myself playing back, and I was like, wait a minute, was Jake just imitating me? Because that's a really good impression.
Yeah. A cinematic of what's it called? Necrozma eating Lunala.
Kieran Lion. That's what I want. But we're watching Ultra Moon, so there's no Kyurem Lion, so... Rip. I don't know. I'm actually... You know what? Here's the thing, and I know this is terrible, right? But, hear me out. Okay? When we had 2016, that was a mistake. Right? That's something that we can all agree on. 2016 was a mistake. 2010 was great. 2010 version 2 was a mistake.
Yeah.
2010 version 3, amazing.
Yeah. Now they like introduced a lot of stuff that was like, hey, Xerneas, stop. So, you know, it could be. Oh, also they killed Dark Void. And
yeah.
So,
yeah. You know what? Here's the thing.
Yeah.
Before we get into this round 3, which is the final round of the day, I also want to mention that I strongly believe that Xerneas should have been a grass type. And I think that would have fixed like half of the problems of 2016.
That would have been good.
Talonflame with the priority Brave Birds of Broken Gale Wings.
Of yesteryear.
And then Fire Punch, Ice Beams. I mean, just like, there's so many opportunities to KO grass types. And Xerneas, if it had been a grass type, it would have been so much better. I mean, it gets Horn Leech.
But like, it would have gotten grass coverage then.
Yeah.
Or, like good grass coverage. So that
could you imagine the Geomancy boosted same type attack bonus, grassy terrain grass knot?
Been ridiculous. Especially in that format where everything was heavy.
That would be so great.
Oh.
So
anyway,
with that, we are actually in round 3. Fight! We've got DaWoblefet on the left. That is Leonard Craft. With the same team that we saw out of him before, earlier in the rounds. He's got Tapu, Koko, Amoonguss, Incineroar, Aegislash, Tapu, Fini, and Salamence. And then Preston Chew on the right. Jake, take it away.
It looks like he's been running a Gardevoir, Landorus, Politoed, Zapdos, Aegislash, and Incineroar as we saw in round 1. And as an added bonus this third round, we actually have a third contender, which is the mouse on Leonard's computer.
Thankfully, on the live stream side, there is no mouse for them, but we definitely get to see a nice mouse cursor.
Well, that's not fun.
I know, it would have been much better. So on the preview side of things, guys, we can actually see a mouse cursor that's like dead center between the two of them. But looking at this, we didn't see Preston bring the rain at all when we saw him playing against Ethan. And then Leonard, we didn't see Tapu Fini in his matches on stream.
Koko. He brought all 4 of his non-Tapus.
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting to see in this format that last year Tapus were basically ubiquitous. And in this season, you can kind of pick and choose. Do I need a Tapu for this? Do I need terrain control? And then sometimes even Megas get left behind.
That's very true. Do see the Gardevoir Landorus lead from Preston once again. That's something we saw in round 1. And we do see Tapu Koko and... Oh, sorry, that's a Tapu Fini and Aegislash.
So it is really nice to see that Aegislash is making an appearance from Leonard's side here. With this Landorus out and about, I think that Aegislash is still in a little bit of a tough position. But we need to be aware that, I mean, Tapu Fini can still do a lot of damage to Landorus, but we still have to think about that Ghostium Z into Gardevoir. So there's just kind of this rock, paper, scissors of this lead out here.
Yeah, no, definitely. We saw in the game last round against John that Leonard's Aegislash, won't be able to take a -1 Tectonic Rage, and we have seen the Tectonic Rage from Preston's Landorus as well. And so, this is, while the Aegislash would love to stay in and get a big Shadow Ball off into the Gardevoir, it's very likely not going to be able to unless Leonard, expects the Landorus to, not go for that Z move.
Right, and we see this Gardevoir going ahead and Mega Evolving here. This does give it the Pixelate ability, which changes normal moves into Fairy moves and gives them an additional boost of power. Tapu Fini and Aegislash are going to go ahead and protect themselves here. So if there is any physical contact made with this Aegislash, it is going to reduce the attack of that Pokemon 2 stages. But the Z move, Groundium Z, this is probably going to do negligible damage at this point, just because of that double protect.
I don't know if I'd call it negligible, though. This is probably going to do a solid 30-40% Aegislash. And considering that the Landorus is still out in the field and pretty healthy, it could potentially be in range of an Earthquake this next turn. And so, even though the Groundium Z, the Tectonic Rage, does get blown into that protect, that's still some pretty considerable damage on an Aegislash. It doesn't have leftovers, it can't heal itself. Aegislash is something that threatens, this Gardevoir pretty heavily.
And something that you mentioned there is that because we've got that much damage, we saw Gardevoir go on the offensive this first turn. It could go for Protect, which is something that we've seen out of Preston before. Right. Protect an Earthquake.
It's kind of risky to blow your Z move on turn 1, but considering Leonard's team, that play from Preston's end was actually really safe because either Intimidate the user which then either the Incineroar would have been knocked out by the Tectonic Rage as well, or Salamence could have come in, taken 0 from Tectonic Rage, but then get blown away by a Hyper Voice. And so, yeah, that's a very safe, offensive turn 1 from Preston.
And switching out here, bringing Zapdos out and about, thinking that maybe Gardevoir doesn't want to take too much damage, maybe fearing that Ghostium Z now, without the Z move. And then an Earthquake coming out. So this Earthquake switching to Zapdos from Preston, making sure that Zapdos, while it's taking a damage animation, is taking 0 actual damage. And a Muddy Water coming out from Tapu Fini with that switch into Salamence.
So a good switch on both ends. The Zapdos immune to that Earthquake. It doesn't take too much damage from that Muddy Water. And the Salamence does get that Intimidate off onto Preston's Landorus. And it mitigates that damage output onto the Tapu Fini. And Leonard does get a pretty sizable chunk of damage onto Landorus. At this point, it probably will be able to be knocked out by, something like a Shadow Ball from Aegislash or a Return from Salamence. Obviously, another Muddy Water would do the trick too. So, not a bad turn for either player there.
And one thing to note, we almost missed it there, is that accuracy drop on Landorus. That might come in handy because you've got 2 sets of Rock Slides potentially coming out of Landorus. If you've got reduced accuracy, you are now more likely to miss either one of those rocks. But Landorus, reset that accuracy drop. Preston is well aware that is a capability here. Bringing out that Gardevoir, Leonard going to go ahead and Mega Evolve this Salamence. Wanting to get rid of that Intimidate, boost his attacks with that Aerialate ability, changing normal attacks into flying type attacks and going straight into that Gardevoir. But Gardevoir able to hang on.
Gardevoir does take that frustration, is able to hang on, but this Muddy Water, it dodges. So that Muddy Water could have been enough to finish off the Gardevoir, but unfortunately for Leonard, he does miss.
Yeah, and Zapdos taking another Muddy Water shot there. Looks like it's not enough to proc any sort of berry there. And Gardevoir, Zapdos both very low. Leonard seeming like he's in a good position, but now with Gardevoir out, with threatening quite a bit of damage with his Hyper Voice, it seems like Preston's still in a pretty decent position here.
Definitely is. Something like a Thunderbolt into Tapu Fini in conjunction with a Hyper Voice would have been is a very safe play at this point. Likely able to knock out both of these Pokemon on the field.
And we do see the Protect from Tapu Fini and the switch here to Amoonguss. And as Jake said, a really safe play targeting into that Tapu Fini, but Leonard recognizing that is a threat and going ahead and protecting that Tapu Fini.
So Leonard decides to kind of reposition himself here. This Tapu Fini is in a bit of a better spot now that this Amoonguss can Rage Powder a Thunderbolt away. We did see the Zapdos was faster than Gardevoir, so if he does choose to Rage Powder, it will direct that Thunderbolt before the Gardevoir can go for a Psychic and knock out Amoonguss. And so this Tapu Fini most likely going to be able to get off an attack here if Leonard really wants it to, but it probably would be at the cost of his Amoonguss.
Yeah, Psychic is a very damaging move. Again, boosted by that same type attack bonus on Gardevoir. Unfortunately, you don't get the Pixelate boost there, but should be able to do a lot of damage. And again, we've seen that Leonard's Amoonguss doesn't have that Pinch Berry. no redirection from that Rage Powder. It just isn't there. The Thunderbolt goes straight into Tapu Fini, and then we see the Hyper Voice coming out here doing negligible damage. And Leonard saying, hey, look, I've got Spore here. Your Zapdos is not touching the ground, so no bonus from this Misty Terrain.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting turn. Preston going straight for that Thunderbolt on the off chance that Leonard decided not to Rage Powder, which paid off for him. He's able to knock out that type of Fini. And instead of going for a Psychic to cover a Rage Powder on the Amoonguss, he chooses to go for a Hyper Voice instead.
Yeah, so it seems like Preston was expecting that there was going to be a switch into Salamence or something there, just kind of covering every option. It wasn't the one perfect predictive play there, just trying to cover as much as possible, as broadly as possible.
Right. I'm not sure if that play was the smartest on his end. He could have been in a really great spot there, with a healthy Zapdos and a knocked out Amoonguss, but instead choosing to go for that Hyper Voice, on the off chance Salamence decided to switch into, two Pokemon that were pretty heavily threatening it. So kind of an interesting play on Preston's end there, but he still does have this Gardevoir. It is able to fire off Psychics should he decide to.
And Gardevoir is going to go ahead and protect here. We have seen out of Leonard before that this Amoonguss has Sludge Bombs, so it has offensive potential. Leonard showing off that he's got Substitute on this Aegislash, so he's going to be behind a sub. But unfortunately, because Hyper Voice is a sound move, that can actually go around Substitute.
He will be able to be damaged by the Hyper Voice, but considering it is a Steel type, it is resisted. Likely won't be able to knock it out through that Substitute, so it's still not a bad spot for Aegislash to be in. And it does really appreciate having this Substitute up against Incineroar, because otherwise, the Incineroar would be pretty threatening with those Fire and Dark type attacks. So now it's guaranteed to take one attack from that Incineroar and be able to get off a bunch of damage.
Yeah, and we have seen that there is no leftovers recovery on this Aegislash again because it is a Z move. And we can see that Preston recognizing that, hey, this is behind a sub, but I can at least get some damage off. And it looks like Aegislash is going to go on the offense. If you see it switching modes there, going back behind the sub and then coming right back out to launch this Shadow Ball into Gardevoir and picking up the knockout there. So again, as you mentioned, able to survive that Hyper Voice, not a huge deal there. And then, interestingly enough, going before this Incineroar.
Yeah, I know. We do see the Aegislash is faster than the Incineroar, so likely with a little bit more training and speed. But Leonard, playing pretty risky with this Amoonguss and leaving it on the field, with the threat of being Psychicked by this Gardevoir or Flare Blitz by Incineroar for a few turns in a row now, and it's paid off for him every time. He's got the Spore off under this Incineroar and under the Zapdos, and so at this point, this Amoonguss has put in a lot of work for Leonard.
Yeah, and looking at this now, we've got the Landorus out and about, and then on Leonard's side, because he did go ahead and Mega Evolve that Salamence, there is no Intimidate available for Leonard, and both of the Pokemon that are out on the field for Leonard are very heavily threatened. Incineroar is now asleep because Misty Terrain did fade away, so at this point, honestly, it seems like Leonard just has to cover this Landorus.
This Salamence is in a great spot right now. The Zapdos in the back is, at pretty low health, and it's still asleep. And I believe it hasn't even taken a sleep turn yet, so it's guaranteed to stay asleep for a turn when it comes in. And so now this Salamence, we've seen the Rock Slide from Preston's Landorus, but considering that we are pretty sure that Leonard's Salamence is, trained to be a little bit bulkier, this Incineroar won't be able to damage Salamence that much. Neither will this Landorus, so he could potentially either start Dragon Dancing here or just go straight for some damage with Frustration.
Yeah, and we're pretty... Looking at this, Preston doesn't have quite as much damage output as this Salamence, so Leonard is cranking up the pressure here, threatening that Dragon Dance. We've got Amoonguss switching out, not wanting to take a Flare Blitz just in case that Salamence wakes up, and thinking to himself, alright, hold on, let me get a little bit of HP back, it looks like, get that Regenerator ability going for Amoonguss, and then going straight away for that Frustration, wanting to clear out Landorus, preventing any capability of recycling any Intimidates. No more switching available for Preston here. And then Aegislash going down, but still allowing that HP to be recovered by that Amoonguss.
Yeah, not a bad turn at all for Leonard. He does get the Regenerator, so he gets a third of his health back on the Amoonguss. and he gets a free switch straight back into it. And I believe the Aqua Berry is still intact, and so Amoonguss is very likely to be able to survive a Flare Blitz and get off another Spore onto this Incineroar. And so something like a Dragon Dance plus a Spore into Incineroar is pretty safe on Leonard's end because this Zapdos cannot wake up this turn.
And we've seen just from previous Zapdos that this Salamence is able to take Hidden Power Ice from Zapdos fairly comfortably, and especially with Leonard's addition of Roost to his Salamence, that will eliminate the flying typing of Salamence for one turn. Leonard going here for a Dragon Dance, understanding that, hey, I need to be a little bit faster just in case you wake up and go for that Tailwind. Zapdos taking what I believe is its first turn of sleep, and Leonard trying to get that Spore off Incineroar.
Yeah, so now at this point, even though Zapdos does resist that frustration, it likely will go down to it because it is such low health. And so now Leonard is in a very good spot to just click frustration a couple times and close this game out.
Yeah, it looks like Preston is trying to get himself set up for the very end of this game, maybe trying to get a Tailwind so that he can outspeed this Salamence. Salamence trying to prevent that, going for this frustration straight away and able to clear out Zapdos pretty quickly there, even though it's resisted. And now the Aqua Berry does come out. Incineroar going for this Flare Blitz, but it is going to be reduced damage thanks to that Aqua Berry, and Amoonguss able to hang on really nicely, but does get burned. Thanks to the Gen 7 adjustments to burn, Amoonguss will be able to stay around a little bit longer. Burn is now reduced to, 1/16 damage, but Amoonguss is definitely on a timer now.
Yeah, it's on a timer, but at this point it's pretty inconsequential. We got this +1 Mega Salamence against an Incineroar that has to stay asleep this turn, and so, the burn would have been unfortunate, but I think this game is too far gone for Leonard to lose at this point.
Yeah, with Salamence here, able to get off frustrations pretty freely, Incineroar still has to take a turn of sleep. And then as we've seen out of Leonard, he's got this offensive pressure of Sludge Bomb. So even if Incineroar decided to wake up, it might get poisoned and put on a timer. So we see the forfeit out of Preston, not wanting to give away any information or waste any more time, just continuing on and press forward to the next game.
Yeah. So Leonard does take the game one pretty convincingly. He played very well with that Amoonguss. He took his chances, got some crucial spores off, and that really set him up to finish the game with Salamence at the very end.
So going into game two.
Yep, going straight into game two. The interesting part about this set, though, is that since this Midseason Showdown is just 3 rounds top 8, both of these players, I believe, are 2-0 going into round 3. There's a pretty decent chance that these two will be playing in the finals, and so we
might get a rematch for finals, which will be pretty interesting. It would end up being almost like a modified best of 7 -1.
Yeah.
So we'll see how these players can adjust here. Leonard going ahead and selecting his Pokemon fairly quickly. Preston trying to make a few adjustments, thinking through things. At this point, with the time that you can choose your Pokemon, for players that are kind of new here, this is a time where you can think through a few of your first turns. Figure out, okay, what mistakes did I make in that game? What adjustments can I make here? And how many of these flowcharts can I go down before they actually happen?
Yeah, no, there's a few options here for both players. I feel like Leonard, with that risky Amoonguss play, it could have gone either way. Leonard could have lost the Amoonguss to a Psychic at any point, and the game could have been very different from there on out. And so, both of these players definitely have the tools to win this matchup.
And Preston agreeing with you here, definitely thinking that, hey, I had this Gardevoir. It was there. It was available. And so he's going to bring it right back out. And we have seen out of Leonard's Incineroar in previous matches that this is not an Assault Vest variant. And so it is going to take more damage than an Assault Vest variant of Incineroar would.
Right.
We know that this is a Berry Incineroar, and Preston will be aware of that. So Zapdos here, maybe coming out to try and get some speed control. And Leonard definitely going on an aggressive offensive front here.
Bringing this Incineroar immediately, it gives himself a fake out option. So he can fake out either of these Pokemon, maybe set up a Dragon Dance, maybe just get some immediate damage off. But it does give the Salamence a safety cushion because both of these Pokemon on Preston's end, carry moves that are pretty threatening to Salamence, whether they be the Hidden Power Ice or the Hyper Voice.
Yeah, so we do see both Megas coming out here, and we see Incineroar going for a Fake Out on Zapdos, preventing that Trick Room from going up, and then a Frustration immediately into Gardevoir with no Intimidates. Salamence not quite able to pick it up, and a Hyper Voice, a very strong Hyper Voice coming out here. And as we said, because this Incineroar doesn't have the Assault Vest, doing a little under half, a very bulky Incineroar, but Salamence taking a huge chunk of damage.
Very similar to what we saw, round 1 with Preston against Ethan. The Salamence getting off some damage, just trading, damage on Gardevoir for a lot of damage on itself. And so, it's kind of interesting to see that, Leonard also chose to train his Salamence in a way that, allows it to survive this Hyper Voice. And also, decides that he doesn't really need this Salamence to be at full health.
Mm-hmm.
And so just immediately letting it take a Hyper Voice.
So we do see this Aegislash switch out, not wanting to take too much more damage on that Salamence. Gardevoir deciding that it doesn't want to be KO'd right away. And Landorus, this is a great switch for Preston here, especially seeing this Aegislash come out. We've seen that Aegislash can go down extremely quickly to a Groundium Z. And now, next to this Zapdos here, Earthquake's fired off extremely freely.
Yeah, a very great switch on Preston's end. He switches a Landorus in on the knockoff, meaning that, he gets the Intimidate off on the Incineroar, and he doesn't even lose his item because he can't knock off the Z Crystals. So this Landorus is in a prime position to, start firing off some Earthquakes against these two ground weak Pokemon, potentially go for something like its Tectonic Rage into one of them to guarantee a knockout.
And we do see Amoonguss come right back out here, wanting to take at least neutral on something from this potential Earthquake coming out here. And no, Preston deciding, hey, Earthquake not good enough. Rock Slide trying to cover that that Salamence switch in, maybe fishing for some flinches, and a Thunderbolt going straight into that formerly Incineroar slot.
That's not a bad play on Preston's end regardless, though, because if you're Leonard, you probably don't want to let Aegislash take a ground attack. And so knowing that the Incineroar would probably be knocked out by a combination of Rock Slide and Thunderbolt, Preston both covers the Incineroar staying in, and the Salamence switching in as well. So a pretty great turn on his end.
And even though we've seen that this Amoonguss does have Sludge Bomb, Landorus will resist that, and we've seen that Zapdos are fairly bulky Pokemon, so it's not going to be a huge offensive threat here. And Leonard, recognizing that, says, all right, I got to bring some sort of damage, bring my Fake Out, intimidate your Landorus so that we can reduce some of this damage output. But hey, that combination there from Landorus and Zapdos picking up and KOing this Amoonguss, clearing that threat off the field. No more redirection for Leonard.
No, it's a very fortunate critical hit from the knockoff on Preston's end because, without that critical hit, it's very likely that the Amoonguss could have survived and gotten off a Spore. And so now, Leonard is forced to bring in either his Salamence at very low health or this Aegislash, which is pretty heavily threatened by something like a Tectonic Rage.
One interesting adjustment that I'm noticing here is the lack of Tapu Fini. Not wanting to prevent anything from going to sleep with these spores from Amoonguss. So that would have been a huge threat, and it was very advantageous for Preston to take out that Amoonguss as quickly as possible, knocking off the Akaberry. So if there was a fire move that he wanted to launch in there, he would have been able to take that out if he didn't pick up the KO. But, now we see the Fake Out from Incineroar, and then a Z move coming out of this Aegislash, gonna do a huge amount of damage here.
If it targets this Gardevoir, it absolutely will be knocked out. If it does get fired into the Zapdos, considering the Zapdos protected, it may be able to survive this Neverending Nightmare and be put in range of its Pinchberry. And so there's a very good chance that Zapdos could end this turn with more HP than it started with. And if that's the case, he'll be in a... Oh, I thought Zapdos was in much lower health than that. Oops, okay, never mind.
Zapdos not able to get quite there. And Gardevoir, at amazingly low health, so that could have just been a little bit of a sacrifice play from Preston here. But Gardevoir now around and capable of firing off at least a little bit of damage. But he definitely needs to be careful here, just because Incineroar does have that Pinchberry, and we saw that Hyper Voice did just under half.
The one more Hyper Voice likely will put Incineroar in that Pinchberry range, unlike the Zapdos I was looking for the last turn.
You were just a little overeager. No worries.
I thought Zapdos was around half health. That was just my fault. We just see the Zapdos set up another Tailwind. It'll guarantee that Preston has the speed advantage for these next few turns. Incineroar going for a knockoff into that Zapdos, gets rid of that Pinch Berry instead. And Aegislash going straight for a substitute.
This is a great play from Leonard, getting that substitute out. Now he's going to be able to take, definitely 2 Earthquakes, protecting the Aegislash pretty well. Both Pokemon on Leonard's side are weak to Earthquakes. But at the moment, at least Aegislash has a substitute up.
It does have a substitute up, but it's still in that Blade form. So if he does, allow it to take an Earthquake to break the sub, and then a Thunderbolt would do a pretty sizable amount of damage. But at this point, it looks like Leonard might be out of options to take attacks from these Pokemon. The Landorus still hasn't used its Z move, I believe. And we have the Salamence in the back with very low HP, so any attack will likely be able to knock it out.
And looking at the Pokemon count, Preston was at 4 Pokemon to Leonard's 3, and a lot of Leonard's Pokemon are very low HP. Aegislash looking at things, surveying the area, just saying, I don't want to take any extra damage. I don't want to lose this substitute either. So trying to protect itself, and it looks like Leonard expecting an Earthquake. And Salamence taking that Thunderbolt not very happily.
No, it does take the Thunderbolt, and it does get knocked out, but at least Leonard does get the Incineroar back in. He's got the Fake Out option, he gets the Intimidate on this Landorus, and so it gives him a chance here. He'll have a turn to Fake Out something, probably fire off a Shadow Ball. But at a certain point, you just have to accept that this Landorus is in a really good spot to finish this game off here. The Incineroar, absolutely in range of an Earthquake, especially if Preston can switch out the Landorus and reset that Intimidate. Aegislash probably could survive one right now, but substitute gets broken. If any more damage gets thrown off into it, then it's probably not going to be able to take another ground attack very well. And so this Landorus could kind of win this game on its own at this point.
Yeah, so it definitely seems like Preston's goal here is to protect Landorus as much as possible, which is shown by that Protect. Aegislash no longer having a substitute thanks to that Thunderbolt, and now Blade form, switching Aegislash's attack and defensive stats. So now Aegislash in its less defensive, more offensive form. But we see that, again, Incineroar at very low HP. Gardevoir and Landorus should be the fastest things on the field, most likely. So this is a very difficult spot for Leonard to be in.
It really is. The Gardevoir and Landorus definitely going to be faster than this Aegislash and Incineroar, like you said, and they'll be able to fire off whatever attacks they so choose. We saw the Hyper Voice earlier in the game did just under half to Incineroar, so it's quite possible that a Hyper Voice could be able to finish off the game right here, or finish off the Incineroar rather.
And Landorus saying, all right, I don't want you to get that Pinch Berry activation. I don't want to call that a little too close. So the Hyper Voice coming in after the knockoff, which is very beneficial, making sure that he's going to clear out that Incineroar without activating any Pinch Berry. And then the Tailwind does peter out here, but even so, Aegislash not known for being an excessively fast Pokemon.
Yeah, it's a great turn from Preston, knowing that this Incineroar does have that berry. He didn't want to just go straight for the Hyper Voice and, potentially not knock out the Incineroar and let it eat its berry. So he does decide to go for the knockoff, get rid of the berry, and then finish it off with a Hyper Voice.
So at this point, it's Aegislash versus the world. That 3-1 Pokemon count, and especially with Aegislash staring down Landorus. And as you mentioned before, I don't think that we've even seen the Z move out of this Landorus yet.
No, I believe it's still intact. So Preston could just go straight for that if he'd like to, or just fire off an Earthquake. At this point, it's going to be... It won't be very difficult for him to close out this game.
And it looks like there's a King Shield from Leonard trying to get that double Protect here. Maybe trying to preserve a little bit, burn that Z move as much as possible, but unfortunately not going to grab it. So it looks like we're probably going into a Game 3 here relatively shortly, and Leonard's going to have to make an adjustment here.
Leonard did decide not to bring that type of Fini this game, potentially in favor, or like you said earlier, in an attempt to allow Amoonguss to spore more freely, because that worked very well for him game 1. But Preston identifying that Amoonguss as a pretty big threat, made sure that Leonard wasn't able to get a Spore off that game. And so at that point, Leonard lost his redirection. His Salamence took so much damage turn 1 and really didn't have a safe chance to roost it off. And so Leonard wasn't really able to get off much damage that game, and Preston was able to capitalize.
And we saw that in that first game, Tapu Fini did quite a bit of damage. Tapu Fini is able to hit both Landorus and Incineroar super effectively. So that game 2 adjustment from Leonard might have put him a little bit behind, even though it was an attempt to get him in a better position to use those spores. What kind of adjustment do you think Leonard needs to make here?
That Tapu Fini came back. Like you mentioned, the Muddy Water, since this Landorus on Preston's end is not holding that Assault Vest, these super effective Muddy Waters are doing a significant amount of damage. I think we saw around, 65-70% in game 1, and so that could very well be something that Leonard decides to bring back. I think that Leonard, on turn 1 that last game, he did allow his Salamence to take a Hyper Voice, and so the rest of the game he couldn't, bring it in and start Dragon Dancing because he was always under threat of being knocked out. And so maybe if he plays that Salamence a little bit more carefully, he might find himself in a better position.
And it seems in game 2 that Preston definitely felt like he had all the pieces from game 1 that he needed to secure that victory. And it looks like he's left that Politoed pretty much in the team, just sitting there.
I don't think we've seen the Politoed at all in either of the sets we've seen Preston use on stream. I think he's been bringing the same 4 Pokemon, so either he's very confident with these 4, or he just doesn't really need to switch it up. These 4 Pokemon are obviously very good, and they've gotten him to this point so far, and so I guess we'll just wait and see if he decided to adjust or just stick with the game plan.
And so we do see the Zapdos Gardevoir lead out from Preston, and an Aegislash followed by Amoonguss on Leonard's side. And so Leonard, again, identifying that we've got an Amoonguss available. It can put things to sleep. It can redirect. It's a very potent Pokemon.
Yeah, and the Aegislash and Amoonguss are kind of an interesting combination from Leonard here because, if the Gardevoir does want to get off a Psychic into the Amoonguss, he would have to do so at risk of taking either a Shadow Ball or a Z-move from Aegislash. And so he's got to be prepared to make a trade if he does want to go for damage right away.
And then we do see that Mega Gardevoir going for the Psychic into Amoonguss, not quite able to pick up the KO. And this is that trade-off that we were discussing, is that Aegislash is now capable of freely Shadow Balling here and able to do a decent chunk of damage to this Gardevoir. Not able to pick up the KO, but it does lower the special defense. And then Amoonguss coming out here with a Spore straight into that what was Zapdos slot. Leonard over here seeing that his Pokemon are the slowest on the field, not worried about a Tailwind, and just freely goes for the Spore, knowing that he's going to get hit first anyway.
That's pretty much exactly what I was just saying. If he does want to go for that big Psychic into Amoonguss, he's going to have to leave that Aegislash alone, and it's going to be free to fire off an attack. That Shadow Ball does a lot of damage to Gardevoir, putting it in range for pretty much anything else that might want to be thrown at it. We are going to see the Tapu Fini come in now.
Yeah, so a great adjustment from Leonard here. Definitely putting himself in a little bit of a back foot position. But, now he's got this Landorus asleep. He knows that Aegislash is going to be able to take a resisted Hyper Voice, even in this Blade form. Now he just freely fires off this Z move here. Ghostium Z going to do a huge amount of damage to whatever it targets.
No, that's a great play from Leonard. He does get the Tapu Fini in. It doesn't take much from the Hyper Voice, and knowing that the Landorus has to stay asleep, he knows that there's a very good chance he can score a knockout if he decides to target that slot with the Z move. And so we're going to see the Landorus most likely just going to get one-hit KO'd by this Never-Ending Nightmare. Oh, but it barely
survived. What a well-trained Landorus. And so also we saw the special defense of this Gardevoir go down. So it is at one reduced stage of special defense here. The Landorus has taken its first turn of sleep, and now we've got Tapu Fini on the field.
All right, Tapu Fini, if it's able to get a Muddy Water off, it should likely be able to knock out both of these Pokemon. And so it might come down to this Landorus, waking up on its first possible chance. It could come down to, Gardevoir deciding not to, risk a Muddy Water knocking it out. And so this Tapu Fini, depending on the Landorus' sleep rolls, it could be in a very favorable spot. And this Landorus does stay asleep.
That is very unfortunate for Preston, not able to wake up on that first turn. Aegislash and Tapu Fini both hanging on, albeit Aegislash just barely. Muddy Water is going to connect with both Pokemon and take that double knockout.
Yeah, so we do see the Tapu Fini, able to use that Muddy Water, hit both Pokemon and score 2 knockouts. And so Leonard, taking an early 4-2 lead after just a couple turns.
And at this point, despite this Aegislash still being on the field, he is at a low enough HP that his utility is a little bit reduced. We are seeing Preston's opposing Aegislash come on here, but we're not going to be able to see any at all substitutes out of Leonard's Aegislash now.
Yeah, so Leonard's Aegislash, at such low health, will be knocked out by any attack that might be targeting it, and so it's gonna. The speed interaction between the Aegislash on either ends could be pretty interesting. We're seeing the King Shield from Leonard's now, potentially protecting it from any attacks, but the Zapdos is going to be faster than both of these Pokemon, able to potentially fire off something like a Thunderbolt or a Tailwind.
Yeah, and so this is a great idea from Preston, trying to set him up a little bit for the late game here, making sure that his Aegislash is faster than Leonard's Aegislash, so guaranteeing that there are no speed ties here. Looks like Zapdos going ahead and dodging that Muddy Water with a skillful dodge here, and Preston setting up his own substitute. What is surprising to me, that there was no target on this Tapu Lele here, or Tapu Fini here, which Tapu Fini is just barely above what looks like a Pinchberry activation range.
Deciding not to target that Tapu Fini leaves it, vulnerable to something like a Shadow Ball or a Thunderbolt, which will both easily be able to knock it out from this range. An interesting note is that the Aegislash on Preston's end, isn't carrying those leftovers, and so we saw the substitute, putting itself behind a substitute in a very good position here in Tailwind, faster than most things on the field. And so considering the lack of leftovers, it's very possible that this Aegislash is also carrying that Z Crystal.
We see a Thunderbolt firing off into Amoonguss here. Preston's Aegislash is going to change form, and we'll have to see what attack it's deciding to go for after a few more animations here. Shadow Ball going off into Leonard's Aegislash.
Yep. Just decided to pick off the very low health Aegislash on Leonard's end, start taking some KOs when he can. This Amoonguss, not in a great spot either. The Zapdos likely not able to knock it out. We've seen the hidden power do very close to this amount of health, so it's going to be interesting to see if Amoonguss can survive a hidden power and get a spore off, or if they just slash on Preston's end is just going to target the Amoonguss instead.
So we do see Salamence coming out now, and with 2 special attackers on Preston's side, that Intimidate not doing too terribly much. And then of course Aegislash behind a sub, not affected by Intimidate at all. Preston, full health Zapdos here. It'll take a couple Dragon Dances from Leonard's Salamence to really do too much. And Leonard, knowing that he needs a little bit more HP on this Amoonguss, is going to go ahead and switch it out, get some Regenerator HP boost here. And it looks like maybe even a sacrifice play on this Tapu Fini.
So we do see the Salamence Mega Evolve, the Tapu Fini coming in for that Amoonguss. Salamence going to go straight for a Protect, not wanting to take something like a Never-Ending Nightmare or a potential Hidden Power Ice. We do see the Zapdos go for that Hidden Power into the Salamence, and Aegislash just opting for the Shadow Ball into that Amoonguss slot.
Yeah,
so very likely we'll be able to knock out this Tapu Fini and even the game at 2 Pokemon all.
At this point, it looks like Leonard is kind of stalling things a little bit, trying to wait for Tailwind to end. He knows that he's got Salamence that's able to take these Hidden Power Ices, but he doesn't want to take any unnecessary damage that'll affect him in the late game. And now that we've got our Amoonguss friend back out here on the field, you can see that he's back over above that half mark. So, I mean, this is a fairly healthy Amoonguss that's going to be able to redirect quite a bit of damage.
It will be able to redirect a couple attacks, but, if you're Preston, you really don't have a reason to go for anything other than Hidden Power and Shadow Ball into that Salamence. And so, especially since the Salamence protected last turn, unless Leonard wants to go for another double protect like we saw a couple rounds ago, a Rage Powder will redirect that Hidden Power Ice and Shadow Ball into Amoonguss, potentially knock it out. But if Leonard opts not to go for Rage Powder, then the Salamence will get knocked out, and so it's kind of a precarious spot for Leonard here. And
it looks like Amoonguss is going to go ahead and protect. This is the last turn of Tailwind. Zapdos is going for the hidden power. It looks like it's targeting right into that Salamence. Preston does not want to fall for any redirection tricks. Leonard, knowing that his back is a little bit against the wall, going for this Dragon Dance, trying to increase as much damage as possible. Aegislash, still behind a substitute, is going to fire off a Shadow Ball into that Salamence without any protection. It looks like this is Amoonguss against the world.
So I think that play on Leonard's end was, he knew that his back was against a wall. He knew that he had to kind of come up with a read if he could find one. And so maybe, hoping that Preston would, target the Amoonguss directly instead of going for that Salamence, trying to fish for, blowing a couple of attacks and it protects. But instead, Preston doesn't fall for it. He goes straight for that Salamence and he is able to knock it out.
And so at this point, Leonard taking the last couple turns. And at the end game here, if you're on the losing side of a match, sometimes you can take that little extra time to plan things out for your next games.
Yeah, so we're going to see Preston, taking this set 2-1. It looks like he will be in finals this midseason showdown. Since it is only 8 players, the top cut is just 2 people, and so we are going to have one more match for you guys. It's just going to be the finals coming up in a few minutes.